What if the strongest team of the season starts to fall apart just when it needs to be united the most? McLaren is experiencing a moment of internal tension after the race in Mexico, and it all began with a comeback that, although heroic, left more questions than answers. Is Piastri's leadership in danger? Is there something hidden in Woking? While Oscar Piastri signed one of the most exciting comebacks of the year at the Mexican Grand Prix, in the McLaren garages there was something more than excitement. There was confusion. Because what should have been a full celebration after the double top 5 was marred by an unanswered question. What has really happened to McLaren's race pace? However, something did not fit from the first free practice sessions at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. The car showed unusual instability in slow corners and seemed unable to maintain a constant pace on the harder compounds. Lando Norris, who usually dominates long runs, found himself fighting to maintain the temperature of the tires. And although Oscar Piastri himself knew how to find rhythm in clean air, the erratic behavior of the car perplexed even his own engineers. The most accepted theory within the paddock is that the aerodynamic design of the MCL39, although superior on most circuits, suffers at altitude. The lower air density in Mexico City reduces the effective load generated by the flat bottom and the diffuser. And although McLaren had worked on specific solutions, such as rear suspension adjustments and new wing profiles, these were not enough to compensate for the overall loss of grip. Andrea Stella, team director, was blunt. We were not able to exploit our potential. The car was not in the optimal operating window, and that left us exposed. Although Piastri managed to advance positions through strategy and individual skill, the car's limitations were evident. Red Bull and Ferrari, traditionally more effective at altitude, knew this and took advantage of it. But there is more. Some experts point to a correlation problem between the McLaren simulator and reality on the track. The team had shown extreme confidence during preseason testing and the first races. However, the collapse of performance in specific conditions opens the door to a possible mismatch in the data that feeds its simulations. Are they trusting the theory too much? And here another factor comes in. Updates. McLaren was the first team to bring new parts to Mexico, including a revision of the right side pod air intake and adjustments to the floor profiles. But the results were not what was expected. In fact, some internal voices have leaked that the team is considering reversing some changes for the next Grand Prix in Brazil, where the altitude will once again be a challenge. The moral blow has been great, because until now McLaren had seemed invulnerable. This race reminded them that even with the most complete car, the margin between success and failure is still millimeters. What is at stake now is not just the technical advantage, but the team's ability to learn and adapt. Because if they fail to solve this mystery, what began as a dream season could become drastically complicated in its second half. Oscar Piastri crossed the finish line in 5th place at the Mexican Grand Prix, but that position doesn't tell the whole story. Because what the Australian experienced on that Sunday was one of the most resilient performances of his entire short but impressive career in Formula One. Without a car completely ready, without the ideal pace, and with an uphill weekend from the first free session, Piastri turned what was painted as a catastrophe into a demonstration of character that left its mark. And yet, as brilliant as that comeback was, it was not enough to calm the alarms within McLaren. The fissures were already impossible to ignore. The comeback began even before the traffic light went out. From the paddock, the predictions were clear. The number 81 MCL39 was not at the level of its direct rivals. Piastri started from 9th position on a circuit where dirty air and the difficulty of overtaking turn each attempt into a calculated risk. But still, from the first stint, his race pace was decidedly aggressive. He executed surgical maneuvers, clean overtaking, and defended his position when necessary with a solidity worthy of a veteran. In the second stint, strategy was key. McLaren opted for an early stop to get him out of traffic, a risky decision that left him exposed for several laps. But Piastri responded with fast laps and clean air that allowed him to gain positions as the rest of the drivers pitted. It was a brilliant move off the wall, but also a testament to the Australian driver's mental control. Under pressure, with little grip and knowing that his championship was at stake, he made no mistakes. And yet, despite the effort, he finished 5th. Because in Formula One, talent alone is not enough. You need a car that responds. And therein lies the root of the problem. The same car that took Lando Norris to victory with an overwhelming advantage did not allow Piastri to even fight for the podium. This difference in performance between two theoretically identical cars, with the same base settings and similar conditions, cannot be explained only by driver sensations. There is something deeper. The immediate consequence was brutal. Piastri lost the championship lead that he had maintained for almost the entire season. He gave it up to his teammate, which adds a natural tension within any team that prides itself on fighting with two competitive drivers. But beyond the change in the points table, the real damage is what cannot be measured. Because within a team, when the driver begins to doubt his machinery, and the engineers do not have concrete answers, a cloud of uncertainty is created that can contaminate the entire project. The most delicate thing is that this comeback, no matter how meritorious it may have been, is not enough to protect Piastri from the domino effect that could be unleashed. Because in such a tight championship, a single race like this can make the difference between winning and losing a title. And if McLaren does not identify the real problem, if it does not rebuild that connection between the driver and his car, what happened in Mexico could be repeated. And next time there may not even be a comeback. At the end of the day, Oscar Piastri showed why he is considered one of the most promising stars of his generation. But his performance, epic as it was, failed to hide the cracks that opened up at McLaren that weekend. Cracks that could be structural. Cracks that, if not closed in time, could let a championship slip away that seemed destined to be dyed papaya. The Mexican Grand Prix not only altered the championship score. What really changed was the emotional balance within McLaren. The British team, which had managed to maintain a harmonious coexistence between its two young stars, now faces an infinitely more complex situation. A silent, undeclared, but increasingly evident internal battle. Because when both drivers have the talent, the machinery and the motivation to win a world title, the team is no longer just competing against Red Bull or Ferrari. Now he competes against himself. Lando Norris came out of Mexico stronger. With his second victory of the year, he became the new leader of the Drivers' Championship. It is a symbolically powerful change. Since his debut, Norris had been considered the future of McLaren, but always with the label of promise. Now it's reality. Now he leads. And he does it, furthermore, surpassing his own teammate in pure performance throughout the weekend. That victory was not the product of strategy or a favorable safety car. It was direct domination, lap after lap, without mistakes. But Norris' rise comes with a dramatic turn in Oscar Piastri's position. Until then, the Australian was the one who had carried the weight of the 2025 project. He led from Australia, was the most consistent driver in the early phases of the championship and seemed headed for a direct duel with Verstappen for the title. Losing that leadership and doing so in a context where your partner wins overwhelmingly hits deep. Trust. This opens a delicate psychological scenario. Piastri knows that any doubt he projects about his performance or the car can be interpreted as weakness. And within a team competing for titles, perception matters as much as results. Meanwhile, Norris, who has grown up at McLaren from the shadows of figures like Sainz and Ricciardo, now has the implicit backing of numbers. And although the team publicly insists that there is no number one driver, strategic decisions in the race could begin to lean towards whoever is best positioned in the championship. It is the natural logic in Formula One. But it is also the beginning of a Cold War. On the one hand, they have the historic opportunity to achieve something that seemed impossible just 2 years ago, a world double. Be champions of drivers and constructors in the same season, with a car built in-house, with drivers developed in their own system, and with a rounded narrative that could position them as the new benchmark of the post-hybrid era. It would be the team's greatest achievement since the times of Senna and Prost, but without the shadow of an internal civil war that contaminates everything. On the other hand, there is the latent risk of collapse. Not due to lack of speed, but due to emotional exhaustion. Because if Piastri and Norris enter into a dynamic of constant confrontation, if the team fails to maintain transparent communication, a fair distribution of strategies and decision-making based on the common good, then what today seems like a fairy tale can become one more case of sporting self-sabotage. 4 races left. For opportunities to consolidate a brilliant project or to watch it fall apart due to not knowing how to navigate the pressure. McLaren is facing the most important moment in its modern history. He can be consecrated. Or he may be marked, again, as a sleeping giant who was inches away from glory. And now I ask you, are we witnessing the rebirth of a dynasty that will mark a new era in Formula One? Or just a fleeting illusion that will crumble under the weight of its own ambition? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.